This is WAPE Channel 69 and the Honest John Show.
And the Honest John Show.
And I had heard that something was going on at the Big Ape in Jacksonville, and I could hear them in Daytona. And I sort of getting interested in what I could hear. And part of that was just the sound of the station. It just didn't sound like any other radio station. It was just different coming out of your radio. And I don't know what it was. I always sort of thought it sounded a little bit, I sort of see colors and sounds in colors, and it was a little brown or yellow. It was just a little different tone to the sound, and I don't know what it was.
It just came in clearer?
Oh, it was very clear, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it sounded different. So I sent him a tape, at least I think I sent him a tape. Jim Shira and I, who was the program director at the Big Ape, have talked about this, and he can't remember exactly either, but I think I sent him a tape. And they invited me to come up, and I came up and met with Jim and Ike Lee, who was the chief engineer, but he was a lot more than the chief engineer. The Big Ape was not organized like any station I have ever worked in before. And maybe we'll get into that. It was an isolated little facility, this perfect little radio facility south of Orange Park. There was no 295. There was no bridge over the river down there at that time. So it was two-lane traffic through NAS Jacksonville and Ortega and all those little communities to get into Jacksonville. So we were just kind of isolated and alone and unbothered by sales staff and management and all of that. It was just a little idyllic little situation, sort of. It was wonderful.
I've heard that the sales staff and the management was actually in a separate building for quite a while. Was that still the case when you got there?
They were downtown.
In the old Prudential building, right?
Yeah. So we never saw them. We just didn't have to deal with them. And it just made it a whole different kind of radio experience. It was this little group of people, disc jockeys and engineers, with a couple of people running the office, and that was it. We just didn't, it was just a small little group of people, you know. It was fun.
You look at the competitive landscape and radio at that time, I think one of the big players is WPDQ.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think there were 13 stations in town at the time.
Mostly on AM, right?
Yeah, yeah. And WPDQ was the competition. Dino Summerlin had worked at the Big Ape, and he went to PDQ and started running a morning show. And Dino was strong, you know. So Jim Shira had, who ran the morning show at the Big Ape and was also the PD, was Jim had, I thought, some pretty strong competition, a little more than I did maybe. Mm-hmm. But even so, you know, it was like Jacksonville was the market, but when you sit beside that 50,000 watt transmitter they call the Beast, you know you're getting to Charleston and Savannah and Myrtle Beach and all those little towns all the way up to Cape Hatteras. So that was part of the focus of it. It was sort of spread out. So the first time I stepped foot in the station, and of course it was a beautiful radio station. It was just gorgeous. The building was beautifully designed. It was laid out, a lot of glass. The swimming pool came up inside the lobby, and the flagstone in the lobby, and real mahogany, solid wood paneling. I mean, it was beautifully done, really impressive. Way out in the country. And Ike Lee, and I've talked to his daughter, and she understands. Ike Lee was the kind of guy that I would avoid at all cost. I thought he was loud, he was boisterous, he was a redneck. He had crew cut, and he could be incredibly rude. He did not suffer fools gladly, but there was something about him that was just different. I immediately just thought the world of him. I trusted him implicitly. He was never anything but kind and generous to me, never anything but respectful of what I did. He seemed to really appreciate what we did. And although he was the chief engineer, he was involved with everything. He went to the dances, he went to the shows. He was always around, and he was part of what went on. And I don't know how to explain that.
Because this was more than just the typical role for a chief engineer at the radio station.
Oh,
It seems
yeah.
like he was very intimately involved in the programming.
Oh, absolutely. And Jim Shira, who was the program director, worked mornings, and I worked late afternoons from 4 until 7. So Jim wasn't around a lot. So most of my dealings with how do we do this and what needs to be done next came from Ike Lee.
It seems like one of the key differences when you look at radio back then versus what it later became was there was more of a personality. There was more of a show, obviously,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Tell us about what you were doing on the air, for that matter, how much music you were playing, what other elements that you were putting into it. Maybe you could expand on that.
Well, I tended to go toward the British invasion. I was a real Beatles fan, and a lot of the new music that was coming along. And so, of course, we had rotation. We had to play certain records in rotation and like that. But we played a lot of oldies. So I used the oldies to flavor the program in the direction that I liked and I thought it ought to go. And I used oldies to keep the tempo up or keep it down. Or when you have a lot of oldies and they're unregulated, you can play anything you want. It gives you a lot of freedom to really shape your program, and I use that a lot.
As someone who worked in radio in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, where I have to say, wait a second, you got to pick a lot of your own music?
The oldies, yeah, not the new ones. But we had pretty much free access to any oldies we wanted to play, which was wonderful. Yeah.
So there you go. You got Shira, you've got you. Who were some of the other key players in the Ape at that time?
We had a guy named Dale Kirby who ran part of the midday, and I don't remember exactly how those hours worked out, but Dale worked part of midday, and Alan Sands worked part of midday. Mm-hmm. Dale is gone, Ike Lee is gone, Alan is still around. Then we had Ron Wayne at night. Ron was a very quiet guy, had a wonderful voice, and he was perfect for nighttime. He did 7 to midnight. And then we had a guy working all night named Tom Haley who had come over from Orlando, I believe. And Tom had a wonderful late night voice. It was very deep and, sexy, and he really seemed to enjoy doing that shift, so, yeah.
You had the news director, Leroy Cumbie, as well.
Absolutely. Leroy's been a fountain of information about the Big Ape because he was there long before I came.
One of the things I've heard is that as the ratings went up, the problem was the commercials went up as well, right?
Yeah. And in those days, the disc jockeys, we didn't have a lot of national advertising for some reason. And we had to write all the copy and produce all those commercials. I mean, it was a job. Mm-hmm. Plus 4 hours on the air every day, 6 hours on Sunday, which was hard because Sunday I had to do all the news, I had to do all the sports, and I'm not a sports guy, so that was just...
This is a good point. You're working a 6-day week.
Yeah, 6 days
behind
a
the
week.
mic. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus remotes on Saturday. We had a lot of remotes on Saturdays. So, and I did, you do a 4-hour remote Saturday morning more often than not. So, that's one of the things when I hear people talk about, rock and roll radio in the 60s, man, and all the party. You can't party and work 7 days a week. You can't do that. Not and do a show the next day.
Yeah.
Or I never could. I never knew anybody who could.
How long did it take you after getting there to know it's like, okay, this is someplace really special? How soon was it that you realized that?
I think I knew it right away. When I first came there, I couldn't look at the tower because it just scared me to death. Because you walk in with that transmitter, and the transmitter was this huge thing, and it had been built by the Brennans, took up a whole side of the transmitter room, and it was water cooled through the swimming pool outside. This was a fabulous place to work, just a fabulous place to work. But it hissed and popped, and you could hold a fluorescent tube in your hand and hold it up to the output tube of the transmitter beyond the glass in the front. The thing would light up in your hand and pulse to the music. I mean, it was just, you could feel it, you know. It was a presence.
Weren't there some panels in the building that would actually light up at times based on the music that was playing?
Yeah, Mr. Brennan, Bill Brennan, had an apartment in one end of the building, and there was a secret way to get into it. And he would come in occasionally on business, of course, and I would see him go through the building into the apartment. But I never went in there but once. I think I went in there to get something one time for him, maybe. But yeah, he had a panel of lights on one end of one of the rooms there that would light up and flash to the music. It was great.
And that pool, which was obviously a key thing that made the facility unique. Okay, so is it true that people could actually swim underneath the pool to get into the station?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the pool was sort of organically shaped, came around and narrowed, went under the glass wall that was the whole front of the station with a big arch of white marble over here on the right.
Some of the radio stations back then had like uniforms or things they'd have you wear. Was that the
Yeah,
situation there?
we had sweatshirts, long and short sleeve, I guess, and we had very nice red and blue jackets with the patch on, you know, for dress-up occasions.
And there were times that you'd be making these appearances just, you know, for free, right?
Oh yeah, almost always. Yeah, yeah. We went through a period there, and you might want to get into it a little later about toward the end of the Brennan years when we got paid to make some appearances, and that may have caused some trouble, but. Yeah, mostly it was free. We just go do it. I've sort of thought about it, that, you know, the person on the air was me, and it was me on the air, but it was also sort of a character, because I couldn't work 7 days a week. I couldn't work when I was sick, but this other guy, Honest John, he could, and he did, and that may be a subtle distinction, but I think there's something of a character when you get on the air that allows you to keep tapping into that energy and keep things going. Because you can't drop it. If you drop it, you can feel them start to go away. You can feel them going away, and it's awful.
And how was that working? Was this something where you were, you know, talking out of, say, every record or every couple of records? I mean, obviously the radio business back then was so different than, you know, what it later became.
Well, we were sort of boss jock, so we talked quite a bit, and you talk over the intro to a record, and you learn how to, you know, you learn how much of a weather forecast you can get between the opening note on a record and when Neil Young starts singing. You know, you fill it up. Yeah.
The story about your air name, I think, has to be told because you went by Honest John, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that. How did you come up with that name?
I stole it. When I was working in High Point, I didn't really want to change my name because it just seemed to be a little bit of an affectation for me to change your name. And FERREE is my last name, and nobody ever gets that right. Americans do not like to put the accent on the last syllable. It's too French or something. So I just put Honest on the front, and I took that from a guy in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He was Honest John, at a station over there. So when I left, when I got out of the range of his station, I picked it up, and it seemed to work pretty well for me. The Big Ape was the only radio station I have ever worked at. When the owners came to town, somebody didn't come in and say, "Oh my gosh, the owners are coming to town. We got to do this and do that, do that." And after the owners left, people would come around and go, "The owner just left, so we got to change." He didn't like that. There was none of that. There was none of that. Bill Brennan never said word one to me. The management staff never said word one to me about programming, what I ought to do, what I shouldn't do. And that was the genius. I don't know how they did that. I don't know how they did that. There was some sort of genius in management there that there was just no pressure. I wasn't afraid of the man at all. He never did anything but treat me with respect, and I don't think any of those people ever lied to me. And that's what it was like, and it's hard to tell, because radio's radio, and I've been in those situations when, the owners were never happy, and there was a lot of subterfuge and backbiting, and it was just none of that. It was amazing.
You've got the Brennan brothers.
Yeah,
They own the station,
yeah,
and then suddenly you had that plane crash.
yeah. November '67. He was taking off from Orlando in his private Learjet and stuck it in the ground in a backyard of some developments over there. I think it set a house on fire. I don't think it killed anybody on the ground. Killed 3 people in the plane, him and 2 more. And we knew when that happened that things were going to change. They had to change. So Mrs. Brennan, his wife, I think her name is Frances. She was a real nice lady, still is, I think. She was running the station. And there toward the end, she came to us and she said, with all the lawsuits and everything involved with the plane crash, you can imagine sticking a plane in the ground in a neighborhood and killing 3 people. There's going to be all kinds of lawsuits. And she came to us and she said, I can't afford to give you guys a raise this year, but she said, I'm going to give you, and I think it was like 10 minutes a week of commercials that we could sell any way we wanted to. And so what we did was we put together this little informal group, and keep in mind, we're not attorneys, we're just disc jockeys, for goodness sakes. But we put together this little informal group, and we would go to the dance promoters and we'd say we're going to have what we call a dance calendar. And if you want us to, you can pay for a personal appearance and we'll mention you on the dance calendar. That's what we did. And the FCC came along, and I don't really understand the timing of that investigation, and it seems to me that it happened at an inopportune time, maybe. But they basically said that the management was not exercising enough staff, enough control over the disc jockeys and the choice of where they were appearing. And basically, he said, the FCC guy said to me, keep in mind that these are federal investigators who bring you into a little room and set you down and read you your rights. I mean,
And this happened to you?
I was Miranda'd, yes. And you think that won't scare the hell out of you, but it did. But I knew I hadn't done anything. But he pointed to a spot on the log that was labeled Inman Promotions. And he said, can you tell me who paid for this spot by just Inman Promotions? You're supposed to log who the sponsors are. And I said, well, it's us. The spot belongs to us because it's part of our salary. But even so, when you have a Winn-Dixie spot on your log, they advertise Hershey bars and milk and and bread, and it's all brand names, and you don't write all those down. So that was our thought. That was a mistake, and it cost the Brennan some money. The FCC charged them $9,000. That and a lottery, and we did a lottery. I think lotteries they're legal now, but in those days, if you had to pay a fee to have a chance to win something that didn't involve skill, it was a lottery, and you weren't allowed to broadcast it. So what we did was we had a dance and we gave away a car, but it was an old junk car, and it was a joke. And the commercial said, we're giving away a car, and there was a tag, a live tag, that said, but it's a piece of junk, don't take it too seriously. But still, it was a lottery, and so that was part of the fine. And but I really kind of thought it was odd that in the letter that the FCC wrote to Mrs. Brennan, they suggested that she sell the station. I thought that was... I didn't quite understand the politics of that. But it was a long time ago. I don't know. They were geniuses. They were just geniuses. Bill Brennan was a huge businessman. He owned a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. He built and he flew his own Learjets. And they designed and built the transmitter, the control board. The control board that we had was built out of anodized aluminum, and it had sliding pots, potentiometers, and it was just a joy to work. It just flowed, It was easy, and everything that they built for us to use was built by somebody who understood radio. So it was just a wonderful place to work. I mean, it was just amazing. The Brennan sold the station to Stan and Sis Kaplan out of Charlotte. And when they came in, they tore out the old control board, which I thought was just ridiculous, and put in one of those stupid things with the wasn't nearly as good. But they had us broadcasting out in the lobby, and they had all these salespeople around, and they were filling up the swimming pool and doing all these things that I just thought were sacrilegious,
When you say filling up the swimming pool, do you mean they were covering it, or what were they doing?
I filled it up with dirt. They were afraid they didn't want kids coming under the wall, and it had never been a problem. I mean, it wasn't a problem. But they did that, and, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't really think I'm going to belong here. But they said they were going to keep everybody. And so we were out there trying to program around this stuff, and then they started then they fired everybody except me. And the reason they didn't fire me is because I think the program director that Kaplan had brought down, a guy named Jack Gale, quit about the second weekend, and he had to get somebody from his staff to serve as program director, so that left an opening for one guy, and that was me. And they put me on all night.
It sounds like you're saying that a lot of the innocence, a lot of the kindness, that connection to the listener was kind of missing, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah. They had a request line. And what it was a huge reel of tape running at 1.5 or 1.25 per second, whatever it was, in a little room in the back. And if a listener called, made a request, it went onto the tape. Nobody ever listened to the tape. And I just thought, I didn't like that. I just, it wasn't right. It just wasn't right.
It almost seems for you, having come in, working under Shira, it almost seems like a lot of the personality, a lot of the joy went out of it, when this change was made.
All the joy went out of it. It was a whole different atmosphere. It was just a whole different thing. And I just didn't fit. I just didn't fit.
If you had to sum up your period at WAPE, working with all these professionals, Shira, Sands, company and all, if you were to sum that up, how would you summarize that?
It was the best job I ever had. It's the only job I've ever had when Belinda will tell you I didn't come home at night griping and bitching and moaning about stuff. You know, it wasn't like that. It was really hard work, a tremendous amount of hours, tremendous amount of responsibility. But it was exciting. It was an exciting time, you know. It was, Paul McCartney, I've heard him in an interview say that he felt like that his job as a Beatle was to go out into the arts scene in London and see what was going on and then sort of transfer that to the music and pass it on. And my job was to take what he and all those guys, you know, it was a really creative time for music. And try to pick the best of it and make it available. So it was, yeah, it was fun. It was great.
Are there any places where people can find memorabilia of the old Big Ape?
Oh yeah, there's a fun place. When we did the XM salute, Mary Jo Trinkler disciplined us so that we found and scanned and dubbed air checks and old photographs, old documents. There's comments. There's comments even. Engineers are still interested in that magnificent transmitter that the Brennans designed and built. And there's conversation about that and pictures and ooh and ahhing about the tubes and all that. But there's a tremendous amount of information there. And it's an old limestone lounge, YUKU, Euro. They'll put it up here, I guess. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of information there. And I took an old air check and put all the slides, all the scans and pictures that I had, which were, we had a professional photographer working for the station, so we've got a lot of pictures of the disc jockeys, but also, you know, listeners would send us pictures, and so there's a tremendous amount of that stuff with the Brennan family and so forth. So I just put a slideshow fading in and out all during my air check, and that's on YouTube. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I did a show when the Paul is dead rumor started. You know, there was a rumor that Paul had died and the Beatles had substituted another person for Paul, and it was all very serious. And when that hit, I spent a whole night at the station. I wrote and recorded this like 20-minute show with lots of music, taking the points from a newspaper article that this guy wrote that supposedly laid all this out and proved it. And so I played the records backwards and I played them forwards, and I did all of that stuff. And it is incredibly serious. It's way too serious. But Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wants it, and I'm going to send that to them. So.
Did you, when this all came out with McCartney, with that album cover,
Yeah.
did you ever believe that McCartney was dead?
No. God, I was a Beatle fan, you know Paul, you know his voice, and sort of his attitude. Yeah. No, I never believed it.
So the purpose of this, what you created, this 20-minute masterpiece here, this was kind of like a way, I guess, a way to sum up what was going on, all this craziness as far as the rumors.
It was to squelch the rumors, Yeah, no, it was fun. We aired it twice. It went on the air a Saturday afternoon, I think on a Sunday afternoon we played it. So.
A lot of calls from the listeners?
Yeah.
So basically it helped to set it straight. It's like, look, he's not dead.
Yeah.
There we go.
But again, nobody told me to do that. Nobody suggested I do it. Nobody knew I was going to do it. I just went in the production room and sat down and with a bunch of records and a splicing block and a razor and put it together. But that's what the station was. That's what the Big Ape was at that time. And I took it to Ike and Jim, and I said, listen to this. And they said, well, yeah, we'll play it. So they did.
Some really creative times. And, of course, a really creative artist who you had an encounter with was Jimi Hendrix. Tell us more about that.
First time he came to Jacksonville, he came with the Monkees, and he just scared everybody to death. He just frightened the Monkee fans because he set his guitar on fire, and he was Jimi Hendrix. He came back a year later as a headliner, and I met him both times. I had him sign posters. I have signed Jimi Hendrix posters signed to WAPE, hanging in my Florida room at home right now. But he was just a nice guy, and he was just a sweet guy sitting on the sofa with his guitar. He always had his guitar, and he walked out on stage and he opened with Sgt. Pepper, and it was just magnificent. To hear Jimi Hendrix from standing stage left is just boom. Then I walked down, and my wife and I sat in the front row, and it was incredible. Yeah.
Was Hendrix kind of quiet, away
Yeah.
from the stage?
Yeah. All the documentaries say he's real quiet. You never see him without his guitar, and that's the way he was with me, I walked in with these two posters, and I said, how would you want me to introduce you? And he just said, Jimi Hendrix Experience. And I asked him if he would sign them, and he said sure. And so best wishes, WAPE, stay groovy, Jimi Hendrix. So, yeah.
Of all the artists that you dealt with personally, where do you rank Hendrix?
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but he was just a quiet, nice guy. When Eric Burden and the Animals played here after the concert, we went down. There was sort of a little head shop area down here in Jacksonville somewhere, kind of a little hippie area. And so we followed Eric Burden around. He was going around looking at leather jackets and stuff. So, but yeah, they're just people. They're just people. They're just people.
John, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's just been a real honor. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Sound, WAP, Channel 69.